the president pulls me aside on at least a couple occasions and suggests that maybe we have the U.S. military shoot missiles into Mexico.
Shoot missiles into Mexico for what?
He would say to go after the cartels.
The question will be how? Will the Navy intercept ships? Will special operations soldiers target drug lords? Or will we see drone strikes on Mexican drug labs?
Did President Trump really say no one would know it was us?
Yes. Yes, he said that, and I just thought it was fanciful, right? Because of course it would be us. I was reluctant to tell this story because I thought people won't believe this.
Trump is outraged as Mexico blocks his crackdown on the cartels. Now, he's taking out his anger on Mexico's president.
But she is so afraid of the cartels that she can't even think straight.
Just a few days ago, Trump signed a top-secret order giving the Pentagon the green light to use Delta Force and SEAL Team 6 to hunt cartel leaders like terrorist targets inside. Surgical night raids, helicopter insertions, and precision airstrikes were already mapped out inside the Pentagon. But the moment this plan leaked, Mexico's president publicly did something Trump himself couldn't believe.
And you know what I told him?
No, Presidente Trump.
No, President Trump.
So what happens now? Is this the start of a full-blown standoff between Washington and Mexico City, or are both sides playing a double game? In this video, you're going to see exactly what Trump's plan calls for, how these missions would unfold if they get the go-ahead, how this type of operation was used in Colombia many years ago to take out Pablo Escobar, and why some experts think Mexico is secretly on board, and the surprising role China plays in the fight. You see, the idea of sending U.S. troops into Mexico to take out the cartels isn't new for Donald Trump. For years, he's pushed to treat the cartels and other violent gangs the same way America goes after terrorists. And to see just how far he was willing to go, listen to what his former Secretary of Defense, Mark Esper, told 60 Minutes Australia.
And then I was having dinner after the election in 2020 with a fellow cabinet member. And he said to me, he goes, you know, remember that time when President Trump suggested you shoot missiles into Mexico? And I said to him, you heard that? He goes, oh yeah, I couldn't believe it. And I couldn't believe how well you managed and talked him down from that.
That was during Trump's first term. Now, fast forward to July 2025, and President Trump just signed a secret order to send the U.S. military assets into Mexico to annihilate the cartels. The New York Times was the first to report this on August 8, 2025, and Secretary Marco Rubio confirmed it in this short video clip.
Their behavior is going to have to change one way or another, but it allows us to now target what they're operating and to use other elements of American power, intelligence agencies, the Department of Defense, whatever, to target these groups if we have an opportunity to do it.
Now, you'd think that Mexico would rejoice at that opportunity, right? But that's what happened. Immediately, the news leaked. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum made her position very clear, saying,
"We cooperate, we collaborate, but there is not going to be an invasion. The United States is not going to come to Mexico with the military."
Now, some of you would remember that this isn't the first time Trump has offered to deploy the U.S. military inside Mexico to go after the cartels this year. He made the same proposal back in May 2025.
If Mexico wanted help with the cartels, we would be honored to go in and do it. I told her that I would be honored to go in and do it. The cartels are trying to destroy our country. They're evil.
But guess what? President Sheinbaum turned it down then, too.
And you know what I told him?
No, Presidente Trump.
No, President Trump. The territory is sacrosanct. Sovereignty is sacrosanct. Sovereignty is not for sale. Sovereignty is loved and defended.
Now, that was not exactly the response many people were expecting from the leader of a country that's losing tens of thousands of people on a daily basis to cartel violence. Some Mexican cities are completely under the control of the cartels. Mexican police and military have no business in those areas to avoid a direct confrontation with the cartels. Mothers, fathers, and even kids are disappearing on a daily basis. Tourists are also being slaughtered like animals. Cartel members are killing each other and hanging bodies from bridges in barbaric displays of violence.
We're talking about sending military forces to fight against the drug cartels in Latin America. Do you think it's worth sending our forces, our U.S. forces there to take this on?
Cartels where?
Central Latin America.
Well, Latin America's got a lot of cartels. They've got a lot of drugs flowing, so you know, we want to protect our country. We have to protect our country. We haven't been doing it for 4 years, and we love this country like they love their countries. We have to protect our country. So, we're playing a tough game.
Since the 2000s, close to 1 million people have been killed or disappeared in Mexico, and in the last year alone, over 30,000 murders have been reported. At this point, the violence and lawlessness that many argue Mexico is teetering on the edge of becoming a failed state. So now, everyone is asking, why would a president who has the interest of her people at heart say no to an offer of help to end the cartels perpetrating such evil?
Obviamente, el Golfo de México es.
The Gulf of Mexico is, of course, the name that's recognized by the United Nations.
Pero el siguiente.
But why don't we call the United States
América Mexicana?
Mexican America? It sounds nice, doesn't it?
¿Verdad que sí? Vamos a llamar.
A sarcastic response to the president-elect's comment, which came along with other declarations, such as his ambition to claim control of Greenland and the Panama Canal.
So we're going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, which has a beautiful ring that covers a lot of territory. The Gulf of America, what a beautiful name. And it's appropriate. It's appropriate.
Well, many people believe that what is going on between the U.S. and Mexican authorities is just public theater, and the theory behind it is very simple. Mexico can't publicly admit that it's letting U.S. Special Operations troops operate on its soil, because doing that would be political suicide, both internally and on the world stage. So instead, they reject it in public and quietly agree to certain operations behind the scenes. So why would they do that? Well, that's simply because Mexico knows too well that they don't have what it takes to take on the cartels on any level. And since President Trump's return to the White House, the United States government and Mexico have been secretly collaborating on many fronts to crack down on the cartels. In fact, according to senior Pentagon reporter Luis Martinez, Mexico has even at some point requested help from the United States.
Talk about, Diane, is that the United States has actually been undertaking surveillance flights along the southwest border with Mexico, but remaining above U.S. territory. But back in February, Mexico acknowledged that it had requested U.S. intelligence flights over Mexican territory. We learned later that some of those flights had provided information to potentially the arrest of some senior cartel leaders. So while the Sheinbaum is saying no U.S. troops in Mexico, she has essentially asked the United States to conduct intelligence flights.
That's why many experts believe that while Mexico is shouting no invasion into the cameras, there's probably a quiet understanding between the two governments. Publicly, Mexico gets to look strong and independent. Privately, they let U.S. forces do the heavy lifting, especially against the most dangerous targets. But how will the operation go down when the time comes? What military units will be going into Mexico to battle the cartels? Is Black Ops, Rangers, Delta Force, and will such operations result in the end of the cartels? Let's break it all down for you. So now, let's say Trump gives the final go order. What would the U.S. military operation inside Mexico actually look like on the ground and in the air? Well, the first step wouldn't be soldiers charging across the border. It would be eyes in the sky. The U.S. military would expand its ISR, that's intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, along the entire southern border and into Mexican airspace. Predator drones, stealth aircraft, and manned surveillance planes would be flying round the clock. Some of these drones would be controlled from thousands of miles away in secure rooms in Nevada, with teams of sensor operators tracking every movement inside cartel territory. The goal would be to build an active, constantly updated map of cartel operations, one that can track every vehicle, shipment, and armed convoy in real time. So, by the time a mission is launched, U.S. forces would have what amounts to the cartel's daily playbook in hand. Now, once that intelligence picture is complete, the special operations units will come into play. We're talking Delta Force, SEAL Team 6, and other Tier 1 operators, the kind of units trained to strike fast, hit hard, and vanish before the enemy even knows what happened. As you guys probably know, these missions would almost always happen at night. Under cover of darkness, helicopters could drop operators directly onto a cartel compound, while fighter jets and gunships provide cover from above. Here's what the scene on the ground would typically look like. The primary targets would, of course, be high-value cartel figures, cartel leaders, senior lieutenants, and the people running the drug labs and money pipelines. Taking out the brains of the operation cripples the network's ability to coordinate and move shipments north. But taking out cartel leadership is only one part of it. The U.S. military would also be looking to hit high-value cartel infrastructure. In this case, we're talking of narco production facilities, chemical warehouses, stash houses, and smuggling hubs. You guys already know that most of these would be located in rural areas, far away from civilian residences, and that's where Strike Eagles, F-15E fighter jets, could be used to drop precision-guided bombs. These jets could take off from bases in places like Idaho, refuel in the air near the border, and then hit their targets in Mexico with pinpoint accuracy. But the problem is that not all cartel operations are out in the open. In fact, some of them are buried deep inside cities and towns, hidden in regular neighborhoods where civilians live. Now, that's where the job becomes far more complicated, because you can't just drop a 2,000-pound bomb in the middle of a crowded city without killing innocent people. In those cases, the operation would rely on small surgical strikes, where military assets on the ground would move to target's location to take them out. Now, here's the reality. Taking out the leadership isn't going to magically end the cartel problem. You guys know that the cartels are like a snake with many heads. You cut off one, and another one grows back almost immediately. If a cartel boss is killed or captured, there's always someone waiting in the wings to take over. That means these operations wouldn't be a one-time mission. They'd be continuous. Strike, disrupt, pull back, gather intel, and strike again when the next head of the snake pops up. This is called retrenchment, a strategy where you keep returning to hit the enemy again and again until they're too weak, too scattered, or too scared to rebuild at full strength. So, in reality, it means US forces could be running these missions for months or even years, maintaining constant pressure so the cartels never have room to breathe. But there's also another layer of risk. As you guys probably know, cartel networks are not only operational in Mexico anymore. These criminals have infiltrated every state and every neighborhood across the United States.
Treat these guys as local street gangs. They have weaponry that looks like what terrorists, in some cases armies have. They control territory in many cases. Those cartels extend from the Maduro regime in Venezuela, which is not a legitimate government. We don't recognize the Maduro regime as legitimate. It is a criminal enterprise, all the way to the various different cartels that operate in Mexico. And in between, you find them in Ecuador, you find them in Guatemala, you find TDA, what people would call street gangs, but actually are operating as criminal enterprises.
So, if the military starts hitting them hard in Mexico, there's always the chance they could try to retaliate on American soil, setting up small terror-style cells to cause chaos. However, some experts think this is unlikely because it would only push the US to hit them harder, and that's the last thing they'd want. The more likely scenario is that they would try to go quiet, disappear into the shadows, and relocate key operations to other countries to avoid direct confrontation. Either way, once the United States military has boots on the ground inside Mexico, it's not something that wraps up neatly in a week or two. It will be the beginning of a long, grinding campaign designed to destabilize the cartels and keep them off balance. So now the question is there any known history of the United States using the military against the cartels? And what was the outcome? So, we have to go back 3 decades to the hunt for the most powerful narco lord of his time, Pablo Escobar. In the early 1990s, Escobar's Medellin cartel wasn't just controlling the coke trade, it was practically running parts of Colombia. Escobar had built a billion-dollar empire, protected by armies of gunmen and fueled by corruption so deep that entire Colombian police units were on his payroll. On top of that, Colombia was fighting the FARC, a heavily armed insurgent group working hand-in-hand with narco-traffickers to destabilize the country.
We're greeted by the Omega Joint Task Force and shown around the scene of the Colombian military's latest battle with FARC guerrillas. We're in a guerrilla camp that the military attacked very recently, and they're giving us a tour of the camp after the bombardment. 2 days ago, the Army Special Forces bombed this FARC camp, and we can see the crater left by one of the bombs. We can still smell the explosives in the air. They told us that at least 6 bombs fell here in this area.
By 1993, the Colombian government realized it couldn't win this war on its own, and that's when the US fully stepped in.
The helicopters, guns, bombs, intelligence gathering equipment, and military advisors that drove this operation have been, in part, financed by US taxpayers. Over the past decade, Colombia has received almost $7 billion in assistance from the U.S.
The United States didn't just support Colombia with the funds, but with boots-on-the-ground expertise. Small, highly trained elements of the U.S. Special Operations Forces worked directly with Colombia's elite police and military units. They provided intelligence from satellites and surveillance aircraft, trained Colombian commandos in advanced tactics, and even joined them on certain missions. The result? Escobar was killed in a rooftop shootout in Medellin, ending his personal reign of terror. But the U.S. involvement didn't stop there. After Escobar, the Clinton administration launched something called Plan Colombia. This was a massive, multi-year operation to strengthen Colombia's institutions so they could permanently push back against the cartels. Plan Colombia had several parts. First, there was military training and equipment for Colombia's armed forces and police. Then, there was anti-corruption programs to root out officials who were working for the cartels. And then, intelligence sharing so Colombia could act on the kind of data the U.S. had already used to take down Escobar. Then was also direct intervention when necessary, with U.S. forces and advisors supporting Colombian-led missions. The results were dramatic. Between 2001 and 2012, Colombia saw a 72% drop in coca cultivation and coke production. But even with U.S. involvement, the outcome wasn't still perfect. The cartels weren't wiped out, and corruption didn't vanish. But the level of success those missions achieved proves something important. When a government is committed to the fight and willing to accept outside help, the results can be huge. Now, here's where we hit the wall with Mexico. On paper, a Plan Mexico could be modeled on Plan Colombia. The same kind of funding, the same kind of military partnership, the same mix of training, intelligence, and joint operations. But the conditions on the ground are very different. The first problem is the money. You see, Mexico's trade is worth over $30 billion a year. That's far more than what was flowing through Colombia during Escobar's time. That kind of cash means the cartels can buy influence at almost any level of government, from small-town police chiefs all the way up to federal officials, including the president. During a Senate hearing in May 2025, Terry Cole, President Trump's DEA administrator nominee, made this chilling claim.
I saw the cartel's coercion of government institutions, intimidation of law enforcement, and their brutal enforcement of control over entire communities.
That's how bad it is. And you guys know that once the cartels have that kind of access, they become untouchable. Additionally, the corruption game in Mexico is more sophisticated. When a local or federal officer starts doing their job too well, they don't necessarily get killed, at least not right away. Instead, they might be quietly reassigned to a harmless position far from the front lines, or they get offered a payoff big enough to make them look the other way. And when that doesn't work, the threats will start coming, and if care is not taken, the person might just end up in a body bag. It's a constant chess match between those who want to enforce the law and those who want to keep the cartels untouchable. And thirdly, there's the issue of public and political will. In Colombia, during Plan Colombia, the government openly wanted U.S. help. They were willing to take the political heat because the country was collapsing under cartel power. But in Mexico, it's a totally different story. Mexican leaders often say they want to fight trafficking, but their actions don't always match their words. There's a lot of lip service, strong speeches, but very little follow-through on the kind of deep reforms that would actually weaken the cartels in the long term. This is why many experts doubt a Plan Colombia-style strategy could work in Mexico, because without genuine cooperation from the top down, the U.S. could pour in resources, training, and even conduct joint raids. But the moment the U.S. pulls back, the same corrupt systems could put the cartels right back in business. In short, the Escobar case showed that with trust, shared intelligence, and real political will, the U.S. and a partner nation can break a cartel's grip. But Mexico isn't Colombia. The cartels are richer, the corruption is more entrenched, and the political environment is far less welcoming to American intervention. And that raises a dangerous question. If Plan Colombia was built on partnership, what happens when the U.S. tries to fight a cartel war without that same level of trust? So, if the U.S. moves forward with full-scale military action against the cartels, the fighting on the ground won't be the only battle. There's an entire second front, the political and economic fallout, and it could get really messy. The first and most obvious flashpoint is sovereignty. For Mexico, the idea of foreign troops operating on its soil hits a deep national nerve. The country has a long history of resisting foreign military presence, and memories of past U.S. interventions still carry political weight. Like we mentioned earlier, even if Mexico's leaders quietly agree to certain operations behind the scenes, they will feel pressure to publicly condemn any action that looks like a violation of their territory. That means we could see a strange double game: cooperation in private but sharp criticism in public to avoid political backlash at home. Then there's the economic risk. You see, Mexico isn't some distant conflict zone with minimal ties to the US. It's America's second largest trading partner. In 2019 alone, the two countries traded more than $680 billion in goods and services. Millions of jobs on both sides of the border depend on that flow of goods. So, a serious diplomatic rift, or worse, sanctions and trade restrictions, could send shockwaves through industries, from agriculture to automotive manufacturing. That was one of the key reasons former Secretary Mark Esper says he advised President Trump against moving forward with the idea a few years ago.
And we would have this private discussion where I'd say, Mr. President, I understand the motive, because he was very serious about dealing with drugs in America. I get that. We all understand. But I had to explain to him, we can't do that. It would violate international law. It would be terrible for our neighbors to the south. It would impact us in so many ways. Why don't we do this instead?
If the relationship sours, it won't just hurt cartel finances. It could hit ordinary people and businesses that have nothing to do with the trade. And while all of this is unfolding, there's another player in the shadows: China. For years, U.S. law enforcement agencies have traced the synthetic chemicals used to make fentanyl back to Chinese factories. These chemicals don't magically appear in the U.S. They're shipped to Mexico, where the cartels turn them into finished products before smuggling them across the border. Many of these suppliers have links to companies influenced or outright controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. In fact, FBI Director Kash Patel made this allegation against the CCP.
The CCP is the adversary of our time, and anyone that says otherwise is being selfish or lying to you or looking for financial gain. They are smart. They are partnering up with the Mexican drug cartels, with the Russians, with every adversary we have, and saying, look, we don't really like each other, but we just hate America, so why don't we team up?
So, this creates a dangerous three-way connection: Chinese chemical producers, Mexican cartels, and American overdose deaths. It also means that cracking down on the cartels isn't just a Mexico issue. It's part of a much larger geopolitical struggle. If the US hits the cartels hard, it indirectly strikes at Chinese supply chains, feeding the trade. That could escalate tensions with Beijing. At the same time, Washington is already clashing with China over trade, technology, and military influence in the Pacific. And then there's the risk of escalation at home. While many think cartels are unlikely to launch direct attacks inside the US, it's not impossible. If they did, if they targeted American citizens or infrastructure, it could set off a political firestorm that forces the US to double down militarily. That would transform a limited counter-cartel campaign into something much bigger, potentially dragging both countries into a sustained cross-border conflict. So the stakes aren't just about taking down a few lords. They're about balancing military action with diplomacy, protecting a vital trade relationship, and managing the blowback from disrupting a global supply chain that runs from Chinese factories to American streets. Trump's order has set all these pieces in motion. The question now is whether the US can hit the cartels hard enough to cripple them without triggering a crisis that's even bigger than the one it's trying to solve. Please feel free to share your thoughts with us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more in-depth videos like this. Meanwhile, click on any of the cards on your screen right now to watch more of our videos.